You know how folks say, like, the child is father to the man? Well, today, we're kind of like flipping the script a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at how, childhood experiences, especially those with our dads,
Right.
can really, like, shape our adult relationships. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And we're going to be unpacking this super interesting study
Okay.
by Delprier and Hill.
Mm-hmm.
It's from way back in 2013.
Okay.
But it gets into how a father's absence can really influence the choices that women make,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to, like,
Yeah.
sex and relationships.
I see. Yeah.
So we're talking about paternal disengagement today.
It is. It's so interesting, how we often just don't realize or underestimate how impactful those early years can be, even on a subconscious level.
Right.
And when we talk about this idea of paternal disengagement,
Yeah.
it's not always like a physical absence, right? Sometimes we're talking about emotional neglect.
Right. And consistent involvement from the father,
Mhm.
or even just the lack of that, that steady,
Right.
that supportive presence of a father in a young woman's life.
Yeah, and all those things can, like...
And these things can leave a real mark on a woman's development,
Yeah.
affecting everything from her self-esteem to how she approaches,
Right.
relationships in general.
So we're talking about this whole foundation of, like, self-worth and relationship expectations and how that, like,
Well,
plays into a woman's life.
right.
But how does that, like, translate into the actual decisions, especially about intimacy? Like, help
Yeah.
us connect those dots.
Well, imagine growing up without that
Mm.
consistent
Yeah.
that consistent affirmation from a father figure,
Okay.
right? You might start looking for that validation and security in other places,
Yeah.
perhaps even turn into romantic relationships to kind of fill that void.
Right. Right. And that can sometimes lead to, impulsive choices or a higher tolerance for risk
Yeah.
in those relationships.
So it's like almost like seeking a sense of belonging and love,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means, like, taking a chance.
Exactly.
And sometimes those chances don't lead to the best outcomes.
Right.
But let's get into this
Okay.
this study by Delprier and Hill.
Okay.
What makes their work so important in this whole conversation?
Well, what sets their research apart is that they used an experimental approach.
Okay.
They went beyond just observing patterns
Mm-hmm.
and actually designed studies to try to demonstrate a causal link
I see.
between paternal disengagement and women's decision-making
Okay.
when it comes to sex.
Gotcha.
That's a really powerful distinction.
Okay, so they didn't just say, like,
Yeah.
this might be connected to that.
Right.
They, like, really dug deep
They did.
to understand the why, and that's what we love
I'm the
here on
best.
the deep dive, right?
That's what we're all about.
So what were some of the, like,
Yeah.
most eye-opening findings
Okay.
from their research?
One of the most, striking findings was that women, when they were reminded of experiences with a father who was disengaged,
Okay.
they showed a measurable increase in sexual thoughts.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just any kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
They were specifically more open to, like, casual
Hmm.
sexual encounters, demonstrating what researchers call, sexual permissiveness.
Interesting.
Huh.
So this is suggesting that like the absence of that fatherly presence
Right.
might actually be impacting how women
Yeah.
view and approach, like, sexuality itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about, like, seeking relationships.
Right.
It's like a shift in thinking about intimacy.
It's like a shift in
It's like for all.
yeah, in the whole way they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And that's not all.
Yeah.
The study also found that these women, they also exhibited more negative attitudes
Correct.
toward condom use, which means that they're indicating a greater willingness to engage in risky sexual behavior.
Now, that's a connection we need to, like,
Revisit.
unpack a little bit further, because
Okay.
we're seeing a clear pattern here
Yeah.
emerge. But the question is why, right?
That's the big question.
Why would these
Yeah.
specific thought patterns and behaviors be linked
Right.
to paternal disengagement?
Yeah.
Like, what's the mechanism at play here?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
what we need to figure out. There are a few theories out there
Yeah.
that try to explain these patterns,
Mhm.
One is this idea of what we call compensatory behaviors.
Okay.
So think about it, right?
Yeah.
If if a woman's early experiences lack that strong, affirming father figure, she might kind of subconsciously try to fill that void through other means, you know?
Okay.
And that includes seeking validation and intimacy through sexual encounters. Right. So it's almost like trying to compensate for what was missing.
Exactly.
And trying to find those feelings of closeness and acceptance somewhere else.
Yeah, trying to find it somewhere.
You know? But are there other explanations for this, or is it just about
there are,
like, emotional fulfillment?
We got to think about, evolutionary perspectives too.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Some
researchers say that from a biological standpoint, paternal absence can be a sign of like an environmental instability, right?
Okay.
And this might trigger like a subconscious shift in reproductive strategies, leading women to kind of prioritize having children earlier.
Oh, as a response to that uncertainty.
So it's almost like our biology like kicks in.
Yeah, like a survival mechanism almost.
With a survival mechanism.
Exactly.
And adapts to the
perceived
circumstances. Yeah.
It's fascinating though.
It is.
Even if it's not always like,
It's nature's playbook.
Playing by the rules.
Yeah,
for sure.
We'd prefer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But
and then there's also the social learning theory.
Okay.
Which really focuses on the importance of modeling.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So the idea here is that if a young girl doesn't have a positive father figure to learn from, she might be missing out on some really crucial lessons about healthy relationships, respect, communication, all that.
Yeah, it's like, and this can lead to
in those essential.
Yeah, it's like they're missing those
building blocks.
Building blocks, exactly.
Yeah. For navigating relationships in general, and it makes you wonder, like, how much of this.
Right, like how much of this is
happening, like
happening on
a conscious level, versus like in the background,
versus just subconsciously.
Put us even like
and I think a lot of these processes are subconscious, right? Driven by like deep-seated needs and ingrained patterns that we've developed over time.
Right, and it's especially important, I think, to acknowledge like
and we got
the added layer of complexity when we look at like. The experiences of Black women in particular.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what I mean? We can't have this conversation without talking about the systemic issues. Within the Black community. That often just compound these challenges,
Obviously, exactly.
We're talking about things like mass incarceration.
Economic disparities that disproportionately affect Black families, making father absence even more prevalent.
And when you combine those... Like systemic factors.
Can you combine those factors?
It's psychological impact.
The psychological impact we've been talking about.
Of paternal disengagement. It creates
a perfect storm.
Like a particularly challenging landscape.
A really challenging landscape for Black women in particular.
Right. So it's almost like those risk factors that we talked about earlier. The seeking validation and making, potentially impulsive choices. They're amplified in a context where those needs are even more pronounced.
For sure. It's a tough reality for a lot of folks.
It is, and this brings us back to those colloquial terms that you mentioned earlier, like
brings us to those
Pookies and Ray Rays.
Yeah, Pookies and Ray Rays.
And while
those terms aren't formally recognized in research.
They
reflect a very
real
phenomenon
within the Black community.
Right. And they often describe men who embody those patterns of
exactly. They embody those patterns.
Inconsistency, unreliability,
consistency,
emotional unavailability.
Emotional unavailability.
You've been talking about
all of that.
And it's not about
And it's not about
labeling or judging anyone. It's about
recognizing the pattern.
Recognizing that these terms, while informal, point to a deeper
point to something deeper.
Societal issue.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. The pervasiveness of these patterns and how they impact Black women's choices in partners.
Exactly. And it's about understanding the root causes.
It's about
not understanding the root causes, yeah.
Yeah.
Not just the symptoms.
It's about understanding that choices are often made within a context.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
A set of circumstances that really shape our, our perceptions and our behaviors.
Okay.
And when we look at the experiences of Black women, that context is often one of, systemic disadvantage, limited resources, and a lack of those positive role models.
So it's less about like individual blame and more about understanding how these larger forces.
It's those larger forces at play.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've laid out. We've talked about the research.
We've discussed the societal context, but where do we go from here? Like how do we start breaking these cycles and fostering healthier?
Well, I think it starts with acknowledging
relationship patterns
and need for support
for Black women.
Yeah, for Black women especially, young girls, who are growing up without that consistent positive male presence.
Okay.
Things like mentoring programs, community initiatives, even access to therapy, right? All these things can really help fill those gaps and provide that guidance.
So it's almost like building like that might be a safety net.
Yeah, like a safety net.
Providing a foundation of support to counteract those factors that might lead to unhealthy choices down the line.
Yeah, those unhealthy choices for sure.
And it's not just about like, fill in the void.
It's about empowering these women
with a father figure,
with the tools and the resources they need.
It's about
empowering healthy relationships.
These young women with the tools and resources they need.
Exactly, yeah.
To build healthy relationships.
Fostering their self-esteem.
Across the board.
Teaching them to recognize those red flags and showing them what healthy, respectful relationships.
So it's about changing the narrative.
Look like in practice,
shifting the focus from like
changing that narrative absolutely
to what we can
build
and nurture.
Sure.
I imagine that involves like open
conversations,
open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's about creating those safe spaces where those conversations can happen.
Right.
Where young women, they feel heard, they feel supported, you know? And it's not just, about talking. It's about showing them different possibilities, different ways of relating to others,
Yeah.
Representation matters.
Oh, for real. Like seeing healthy relationships modeled in our families and communities and even like in the media they consume.
Yes, absolutely. It's like
that can make a world of difference.
It's like planting those seeds, showing them that they deserve love.
Right.
They deserve respect, that those patterns of instability don't have to define their future.
Exactly. And it's about,
It's about expanding their horizons, giving them a vision of what's possible.
Expanding their horizons, yeah.
And it's not just about romantic relationships either. We got to think about strong friendships, mentorship connections.
Even those positive bonds with teachers or community leaders.
Right.
All those can play a role.
Right. It really takes a village.
Shaping healthy relationship patterns.
Right. Surrounding these young women.
It does.
With love and guidance from all directions.
Yes.
But, this whole conversation has been focused on women.
Right.
Where do men fit into this?
Well, yeah.
They're a part of the equation, too.
Of course, we can't talk about breaking these cycles without acknowledging the role that men play. It's not about, placing blame, but it's about encouraging responsibility, accountability, positive engagement, It's about fathers stepping up.
Right.
And being present.
Yeah.
Not just physically, but emotionally, too.
So it's about men understanding.
Exactly. It's about men understanding the impact they have, both positive and negative.
And choosing to be us.
And choosing to be a force for good.
Force for good.
And
I imagine for men who maybe didn't have those positive role models.
And for those who didn't, it's about breaking
themselves. It's about breaking those
inherited patterns.
Right.
It's about seeking out guidance. learning from healthy examples, and committing to be the kind of father, the kind of partner.
The kind of father that
they wish they had.
Yeah.
You know?
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
To change the narrative.
To change the narrative.
You know, that's what's so powerful.
It's the beauty of it.
About knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It gives us the tools to understand ourselves, to make different choices.
Yeah.
To create change.
For sure.
And it's not just about individuals.
And it's bigger than just us.
It's about our families.
It's about our families.
Our communities.
Our community, our
whole society.
Our whole society, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the research, the social context, and even like some potential solutions.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to chew on, something to spark further reflection.
I like it.
We've talked a lot about the negative impacts of paternal disengagement, but what about the flip side?
Yeah, the side of the coin.
You know, what about the women who did have those strong, positive father figures in their lives? Does that experience act as like
That's a great question.
a buffer?
It's one that researchers are still exploring.
Okay.
But there is evidence to suggest that that having a supportive, involved father can have a profoundly positive impact on a woman's life.
So it's not just about who's missing from the picture, but it's also about
who's there,
who's present,
and the kind of love
and guidance
they provide.
You know.
Yeah.
It's about filling those gaps.
It's about both, you know.
Also about amplifying.
It's about filling the gaps, but also amplifying
the positive influences.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And it highlights how important it is to have positive male role models in general.
Okay.
You know, it doesn't have to be a biological father.
Right.
Could be an uncle, a mentor, a teacher.
Right.
Anybody who can provide that consistent support and show young women what healthy masculinity
looks like in action.
In action.
You know, I'm thinking about all the women listening right now.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to make sense of their own experience.
Because their own journeys.
What message would you leave them with?
I would just say this, you know, your past doesn't have to define your future.
Okay.
You have the power to break free from unhealthy patterns, to choose differently, to create the kind of loving, respectful relationships that you deserve.
Okay.
And remember, asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. There are people who care about you, who want to support you on this journey.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And to everyone listening, whether you're, you know, reflecting on your own experiences or you're someone who wants to be a better ally, remember this. Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
Understanding these complex dynamics, having these tough conversations.
That's how we make change.
That's how we start to create a world where everyone has the chance to thrive, to love and be loved in return.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that wraps up today's deep dive. We covered some heavy stuff today.
We did.
But remember, there's always hope and there's always help available.
Yeah.
Take care of yourselves.
Take care.
And we'll catch you on the next episode.
All right, peace.
Peace.